the power of your podcast, Sanjay, is that I'm finally recognized by some young faces as well. So thank you.
We have gained a lot of traction, and I love receiving your comments. So we are going to talk about something that happened at the global stage that is important to the entire world. So yesterday, Trump inauguration. So President Trump has taken back the office after 4 years, and he has reversed some of the major policies that the previous government has placed. So let's see how those policies going to affect us and the entire world, as well as how it would define his term for the next 4 years, as well as what are his plans for the Earth's climate, as well as scientific discovery and global politics. So here with us to discuss that, as usual, hi Nilan.
Hi, hi. And yes, we absolutely love the comments, right? So yes, thank you all for the reception.
You said that you have found a fan. A fan has, I
Yeah,
think, recognized you.
shout out. Yeah, so as I was at Park Street Gourmet doing some grocery shopping for sausages and all that, I got approached by one of your viewers, one of your subscribers, very bright gentleman. We had a quick conversation, and yeah, so I was just telling him, right? I've been on Al Jazeera and WION and even on local television many times, and it's always the older crowd that recognizes me. So the power of your podcast, Sanjay, is that I'm finally recognized by some young faces as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, so Trump, what's he going to do? What's all the ruckus is about?
Yeah, so well, the ruckus number one is because it's Trump, right? So let's face it, even if Trump decided to just come in there and just lie in a coffin for 4 years, there would still be controversy, right, over
Yeah.
what he's doing, right? How dare he sneeze a certain way? How dare he yawn a certain way? So that's always going to be there. But I mean, once again, not to belittle the concerns about Trump, because there are some very legitimate concerns about the Trump presidency as well, right? So once again, we should avoid looking at it in a black and white way. So if we were to look at his most recent executive orders, there are a few recurring themes that we can see. So, for instance, we can see that energy security is going to be a big
No, let's
part.
go through them one by one. Let's go through them one by one.
Perfect.
I just want to know your idea. Are you kind of a okay? How do you compare the two administrations, Biden versus Trump's?
So the Biden administration essentially carried forward many of the previous Trump regime's policies in some cases, right? And in some cases, in terms of things like, let's say, the culture war, there the Biden administration and the Democrat Party itself is very different from the Republican Party and the Republican administration. What we find is that typically there is a lot of continuity from regime to regime, because let's face it, before Trump came in, it was a one party system masquerading as a two-party system. That's how the American, if you go to the 90s, for example, Bill Clinton's Democrats and the Republicans, most of them were not that different. They just belong to different parties. There might be small things, but now there's a big difference between Trump and, let's say, Biden or any alternative that would be put up
You
to
mean
Trump.
you mean the
So,
difference in ideologies?
difference in ideologies to a much larger extent than we've typically seen in American politics over the last, let's say, 75 or 80 years or whatever, right? So, in that sense, I would say that Trump is going to make big changes on four main things. One is immigration, as we all know. So, and when we go through the executive orders, we will also see that there's a lot of emphasis on that. Two is, as I was saying earlier, energy. We will see that there's a big focus on energy security, ramping up energy, particularly LNG production and things like that. Third, the culture wars. So we will also see an end to the DEI stuff and the gender, there are whatever
What's
645
the
different
DEI stands for? Diversity.
diversity, equality, and inclusivity,
Okay.
if I'm not mistaken. I mean, it all basically stands for what in popular culture is called woke.
Mm.
So the gender stuff, the diversity stuff, the way that morality is kind of crammed down your throat, or you're an evil person if you don't actually accept these kind of new moral values that are being placed on society. So what in popular discourse would be called quote unquote woke,
Mm.
so going up against that is another big theme that we
Mm.
see
Mm.
in Trump's executive orders.
Mm.
And finally, just the idea that national obligations are more important than international obligations. And this we are referring to all kinds of things, pulling out of the WHO and all of that
Mm.
uh, falls under this major bracket of
Paris
making
Accord.
sure, yeah, making sure it's emphasized that American interests are far more important than international obligations.
Okay, before going into that, I would like to make a parallel comparison between Sri Lanka's political system and US's. In Sri Lanka, we normally see the division. I mean, we had rogues and non-rogues. Now we are seeing a division that might form in the future where it's going to be classic leftism and the right-wing politics, right? Maybe center left or center right. So that's you there. I think CIA is blocking us.
Yeah, sorry about that. Am I back? I got disconnected.
Yes, you're back.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely right. I sense a foreign conspiracy here. Yes.
Okay, so let me come back to the topic. I was drawing parallels between Sri Lankan politics and US politics. So in Sri Lanka, we see that now the politics are aligning with the classic leftism and right wing politics. Before that, we had rogues versus non-rogues. Now we are coming back to US when we see Republican and Democratic, where Republicans consider them more conservative and Democratic consider them more liberal. So how do you draw parallels? Does conservative mean right wing by default, or is that some different thing that's happening in America that we see it as leftism and right wing politics?
Yeah, so usually, so the term left and right, if I'm not mistaken, comes from France a few hundred centuries ago, where on the right side of the king, the representative of the merchants and the
Oh,
industrialists
really?
and all that would sit, and on the left, the representative of the lower classes, the working classes would sit. If I'm not mistaken, if I'm remembering my
Wow,
European history right.
wow.
So I'm sure one of your subscribers would let us know if that's. But off the top of my head, that's what I think it is. So it's a European construct by
Nilan,
default.
just let me stop you right there. Just this is just for the viewers. I mean, if you search the history, if you learn the history as did Nilan, then you might came upon these facts. That's fine. But the thing is, for us as non-historians and non-political analysts, for us to even know these things, we need to learn from someone like him because we don't know even to ask the right questions in ChatGPT to know this stuff. So that's the thing. There can be all the knowledge gathered into a certain chat program, but if we don't know what questions to ask, we don't know that has happened in the history. So that's why I was so amazed by that because I never thought to question it like that, even from a AI. So back to you.
Yeah. So my disease is asking too many questions. So I have lots of answers for a lot of useless questions, but thankfully you turn them into useful questions, right? So as I was saying, this is by default and a European construct. So we must always be quite careful. Usually, it's the conservatives who are right wing because usually the rich and the wealthy would like to preserve the status quo because they are the privileged. And usually the left tend to be the more, what do I say, the more firebrand, revolutionary ideology because they tend to be the discontent of society. Now, in terms of American politics, it's very interesting that you bring up the rogues versus non rogues and the left versus right argument because now, from the perspective of American politics, it's become rogues versus non rogues, where the Democrat voters look at Trump and his people as a bunch of thugs, And Trump and his voters look at the Democrat Party as these deep state conspiracy architects who have ruined the country using positions of power. So, from the perspective of both the Democrat fan base and the Republican fan base, it's now a rogue versus non rogue political narrative there.
So again, coming back to the economics or the political system, capitalism is essentially can be considered as part of conservative politics or right wing, left wing politics.
So, in
Not
modern
a
day,
left wing, more of a liberal sense of politics.
yeah, so in modern day politics, it's typically been associated more with the right and more with what we would call liberalism in that globalization sense. So, in the 90s, for instance, there were center left people who were pro capitalist as well. If you look at somebody like Bill Clinton, he was considered to be liberal, he was considered to be a progressive.
Progressive
But
and liberal does not necessarily mean they are against capitalism, right?
exactly. It doesn't necessarily mean that. So, but however, in some cases, progressives tend to be more left leaning. Progressives tend to be, liberals tend to be a little more left leaning. Whereas what you see in American politics today within the left itself, there's almost a civil war between the proper left and the liberals who belong to the same camp. So,
How do
for
you
instance,
distinguish? What are the characteristics?
so for instance, the actual left would be all about economics. So Bernie Sanders would be an actual leftist in the Democrat Party, whereas a
Has
Hillary
some
Clinton,
of the Marxism principles woven into his ideology.
not some, as in it's a basic modern day version of Marxism, and all of these things, socialism and all that, are essentially modern day versions of stuff that came from the same tree. So, in terms of the welfare state, in terms of the economic trade positions that they want the American government to take and all that. So, in the 2016 elections, in the 2020 elections, we saw Bernie Sanders get a huge amount of support in the run up of the presidential race from the left within the Democrat Party. But then there were liberals who worked against Bernie Sanders, and they are the mainstream Democrats. Whereas now I would make the argument that the left is now becoming a bigger and bigger part of the Democrat establishment, while the old liberals are slowly dying out, because the old liberals tend to be quite old, whereas the leftists tend to be quite young. So they will eventually get replaced, and the Democrat Party will eventually become a proper leftist party once the age demographic catches up.
So those old liberals mattered in the swing states for Trump.
I would say none of them really mattered in that sense in this particular election. I would say this election was fought more on the basis of issues like rising prices of commodities, day-to-day goods, and all the culture stuff that a lot of people were worried about. And in
Government
American
inefficiencies, government inefficiencies,
government
border wall.
inefficiencies, yeah, the border security, illegal immigration. So typically over the last few elections, and this is reflected in this election as well, it's basically an urban versus rural race where the big cities vote for the Democrats, and almost everyone else has voted for the Republicans. But because the dots on the map are so densely populated, the Democrats and the Republicans are more or less evenly matched, where one wins over the other cycle for cycle. But essentially, there are no blue states and all that. There are blue cities at this point, and everything else has just turned red. So even though the numbers game is still close, it's basically city dwellers versus everyone else.
Okay, so let's examine what are the things he's bringing into the table this time. So on the very first day, he has signed some executive orders. So can you compare the executive orders in a legal sense to will that have somewhat of a counterpart in our legal system?
Right. So First of all, an executive order is something, as we know, that a president can decree, and it does not need to be passed by Congress.
Hmm.
So basically, it's
Okay.
something where the executive, because usually we have the executive, the judiciary, and the legislature. The executive being the government, the judiciary being the courts, and the legislature being parliament, or in the American case, what they would call Congress.
What's the
So,
house? They have a
sorry?
house. They have a
Yeah,
house
if
too,
I
right?
yeah, yeah. So the Senate is kind of like the upper house,
Mhm.
and the Congress is kind of like the lower house or something like that, right?
Okay.
So once again, I'll have to check up on the terminology again, but it's a bicameral system,
Mm.
kind of like the Indian system where there's a Lok Sabha and a
Mm.
Rajya Sabha and all that. There's a bicameral system there. So basically, an executive order is when a president is able to pass that order without it being approved by the legislature.
So it has a legal weight.
It has every legal weight possible. So all of these are legally binding orders.
Okay. So
Every
US
single one.
doesn't follow this Latimer House principles.
You mean the separation of
Yes. Yeah.
powers?
Separation of power between you.
So basically, executive orders are a way to bypass the traditional separation of powers. So
Oh.
traditionally, the separation of powers does exist. An executive order is something that you only see in executive presidencies. It's only in countries that have a special executive presidential system where they will have this power to give out an executive order.
Because the
So
presidents themselves campaign to get the vote.
exactly. And because the American system was always built with a strong leadership position in mind. This is how it's been since the time of George Washington. So it's the entire thing is built around the premise that we need good leadership and one person at the top, which is why the American president is also the field marshal of the American military. Right? So that power
We
is
have
always
in that sense we have similarity in the executive presidency in both countries. No?
yes, yes. So most executive presidencies will have that, where that the actual president will have powers to override the usual checks and balances.
But our president does not have the power to override something that the parliament has passed, as far as
Yeah,
I
if
know.
I'm not mistaken, when the executive presidency first started during
Then they have,
JR's
yeah,
time, if I'm
yeah,
not
yeah.
mistaken, it was very much an American-based
Mm.
system where you could bypass these checks and balances. But over the decades, because the executive presidencies come under so much debate here,
Mm. Mm.
there are checks and balances. And let's face it, if there are checks and balances, then there's no real point in having an executive presidency, right? The whole point is that under certain emergency situations, you can bypass that. That's the whole
So
point.
it's a sanctioned dictatorship. Just that we only get we might get a crazy person here. More chances of getting a crazy person here elected into the office, and we cannot do
Yeah.
anything about it.
Yeah, or it would be, do you want a sanctioned dictatorship by three bodies? Or do you want a sanctioned dictatorship where there's one person with the ultimate authority? Because either way, no matter which country we live in, the executive, judiciary, and legislature can dictate our lives in every single form anyway. So it's not like the rest of us live in a jungle, even if it's not a dictatorship. So it'll always be some kind of administrative power that the government is exercising on us, if
But
that
to
makes sense.
but to have some sort of checks and balances of those powers without letting them go unchecked, we have independent commissions and the opposition and the judicial independence. Those are the concepts that were brought in to balance these things out, right?
Exactly. So the judiciary is one of the pillars of that. So the judiciary's job is to make sure that the law is implemented in the correct form and that laws are not formed or passed in a way that is contrary to the country's constitutional principles or country's national interest, which is why courts do have the right to strike down laws, but only in very select cases. But in the American system, because the Supreme Court is itself made up of political appointees, that once again complicates things even more, where anybody can question whether the judiciary will actually question the executive or not. So the American system is a very weird system. On the surface, it's very much like all the other traditional separation of powers based systems, but there are certain idiosyncrasies or certain unique traits to the American structure as well.
So on paper, you can override an executive order through the judiciary in US. That's
Yes, on paper, the Supreme Court can. On paper.
if it's unconstitutional.
Yeah, if it's unconstitutional or if it's really, really contrary to the national interest of a country or something like that.
Okay. So Nilan has sent me an article to share with you. So let's just go into that. Can you see it?
Yep. So if you can just go down to that table,
Okay. Which table? This one? No.
no, just keep going down until you see a table. Just keep going, keep going. Ah, there we go. So this is a list of all the executive orders that he's passed on that day before yesterday. Oh no, yesterday. So
We have
just pick
26.
one which looks good and we'll discuss that.
Renames. Okay, this is a crazy one. Renames Mount Denali Gulf of Mexico to Gulf of America.
Yeah. So this is actually speaking the least impactful of the whole bunch. This is basically symbolism. It's not going to change anything. This is
See, Gulf
essentially
of America, the
posturing.
area formerly known as Gulf of Mexico, and now they are renaming it. So that's what basically Nilan is doing. He's going to explain us and analyze us what this other stuff is all about. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so they are basically going to rename the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. This will not have any real world repercussions, in my judgment. But what it shows is that messaging is extremely important to the Trump administration. This is something that we've known all along. And it shows that the Trump administration is not going to shy away from embracing this. As in, Trump is not going to see this as something that he needs to tone down. Trump is going to see this as something that he needs to tone up. So, because renaming something, come on, the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, everybody knows that it's more of a PR thing.
Yeah.
But it's still important symbolically.
Okay. Okay. Okay, this one is important. I thought because we've been seeing in movies and TV shows as well as in news that most of the Mexican and South American drug cartels use US as their customer to sell their drugs. And given all the DEA and FBI operations, still they are reigning supreme. So he wants to end that, and by marking them or designating them as foreign terrorist organizations. What's the rationale behind that? Does making them marked as foreign terrorist organizations changes anything in terms of laws and the reach of the government to get these cartels under control?
Absolutely. And that's precisely the point. So, terrorism laws typically tend to be a lot
Nice.
stricter in terms of you being able to, in terms of surveillance, in terms of arresting them, in terms of detaining them, in terms of the burden of proof that's required to get a warrant from a judge. For all these things, terrorism related activities, it's a lot easier to strike down on terrorists than on normal criminals, because there are particular laws that apply during peacetime which do not apply during wartime. So by designating them as terrorists, the laws that we can use against them become a lot stricter in terms of our own power. And it's also easier to go after their funding, because terrorism funding now, even if these guys have their funds in another country, we can go, at least Trump can go to those other countries and say, hey, you guys are being used as a hub for terrorism financing. And then these countries would be like, oh, hold on a second, now that's going to bring down some serious heat on us, because them just doing it through the cartel money laundering their assets through fake front businesses is one thing. The instant you get involved in terrorism, many of these guys who facilitate this kind of service will no longer want to be involved.
So it's a quite effective strategy, no?
Very
If
effective strategy, yes. But there will also be human rights concerns parallelly. That this might lead to human rights violations, this might lead to innocent people being arrested, it might lead to innocent people being affected, blah, blah. Whenever we make a strong law to tackle a crime, there's always a risk that human rights violations can happen as well. The two almost go hand in hand, which is why that debate always exists. That tension between the security community and civil society will always exist because these two go hand in hand. So if you have a very, very strict law, let's say your country has 100,000 officials, at least one or two of those 100,000 officials are going to be bad people who use these strict laws for bad, dishonest, selfish, cruel, ruthless purposes. So, in that sense, yes, it's effective to strike down against the cartels, but there will also be human rights concerns.
Yeah, good perspective. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. We have federal hiring to. I'm just not going one by one, but I thought that everything is kind of discussion
Yeah.
worthy. So if we don't have time to today, we'll do another one next week. Reforms federal hiring to prioritize merit, skill, and constitutional dedication. So
So this is
it begs
basically
it begs the question that are we talking about this now? I mean, shouldn't that be a given?
yeah. So this is a direct strike against the DEI stuff. That your recruitment and all that should not be based on diversity quotas and equality plans and inclusivity
Oh, so
plans
these
and
two
all that.
goes together, right?
Yes, yes. Many of these things. So there are certain themes, and there are multiple orders under many of these themes. So border security, energy, gender, blah, blah, blah. So this is essentially to make sure that there's a meritocracy in the recruitment rather than racial and diversity oriented recruitment.
Okay, so there was this diversity hires that you need to make, no, mandatory diversity hires. So no longer that is enforced. Is it? Is that what this says?
Well, I mean, this order is that should no longer be enforced. So, as far as the government sector is concerned, they can no longer enforce that. It has to be a meritocratic process.
Okay. So the federal government, whatever the policies they had on that DEI initiatives, is no longer in effect. And
Yes.
I saw that in Sri Lanka also there were a couple of seminars, gatherings regarding educating organizations about DEI by various funding organizations, NGOs. So will that continue, or does I mean, will they get affected by this as well?
I mean, look, so I am typically against this kind of stuff. I am typically against forcibly trying to create equality, because I think history teaches us that equality can be created organically, but it's almost impossible to create equality through force. And any kind of
Examples?
inclusivity.
Any
So, for
examples?
instance, if you look at almost all the affirmative action programs in, let's take India as an example, where they have a quota system, right, and they have what's called reservation. What that's basically created is politics along those lines as well, where each caste now also has a political party representing that caste. And now this political party can only survive if that caste remains downtrodden. If not, these guys go out of business. It's kind of like the Tamil parties in Jaffna, right? It's kind of like if you look at the traditional northern parties in our own country right now. Why is it that none of these guys have done anything for the country? Why is it that, okay, forget about the rest of the country. Why is it that, can you name a single thing that any Tamil party has done for the Tamil people that has actually changed their lives? Can you name even a single thing? I mean, I've asked many people this and they always go ba 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 in reply, right? Because it
As
doesn't.
far as I know, they return most of the money that's get allocated to the provincial councils in those areas.
And think about it. Can these Tamil parties actually survive if the economic standards of the North goes up? The answer is no. So it creates this cycle where political parties and political interests have a reason to not empower you and to keep you unempowered. So once you try to bring in forced inclusion and forced equality into a system like a government system, all this ends up creating is bad blood and disharmony. It does not do anything in the long run, because in the long run it's a merit based system that can produce results. Now this is not to say that there cannot be empowerment programs. For instance, pro empowerment programs for women, empowerment programs for minorities, all of these are possible, but they need to be done in a way where the workforce does not feel strangled, where the workforce does not feel throttled. And unfortunately, the problem with the way in which DEI and quotas and reservations and all that are typically implemented, it ends up strangling a lot of businesses and strangling a lot of sectors, which is why I'm typically against it.
Great. Okay, so the next one we have recognize only biological sex in federal policy, ending gender identity ideology. So
Yeah,
LGBTQ
so this is basically
plus
saying there
thing.
are only two genders, male and female. None of this 800 genders, 900 genders
Wow.
type stuff. That's
Okay.
kind of getting traction. So we're going to go back to actual biology and the biological research. We're going to go off the basic dichotomy of male and female.
So will that somehow, in a way, hinder certain people's rights? Or do you
So
think that this should be the standard way of doing things, but if you have any special requirement, that can be treated separately? That's the basic narrative of this.
yeah, so we'll have to wait and see how it actually works itself out. The basic problem is that the gender stuff, many people consider it to have gone way out of hand and kind of way beyond, where you have 6-year-old children and 7-year-old children being given hormones and puberty blockers and things like that, where once again the
By their
question of,
parents.
sorry.
By their parents.
But in some cases, with the consent of the parents, but in some cases, what happens is the parents end up getting prosecuted for trying to suppress the child's actual gender. So let's say you have a boy, and now let's say your 6-year-old son or daughter says, "Hey, guess what? I'm actually a man or a woman or a boy or a girl or whatever," right? The fear is that if you say no, you're a boy, you will be the one who now gets punished by the government
Really?
for, yeah. So that's the whole day. If you've
Who's
been
gonna
following
report that? Who's gonna report that? This happens inside homes, right?
yeah, it happens inside homes, but the schools, the problem, the major problem is that the schools are, most of them are told to be on board this entire agenda in terms of
If the students goes to the school and talks about what happens in their homes, and the parents can be prosecuted based on their.
yeah, if the girl says I'm actually a boy, or if the boy says I'm actually a girl, in many states in the United States, the school would actively encourage that transition, which is why this became such a
That's
controversial
crazy.
cultural issue. Hmm?
That's crazy. I mean, it's so crazy to imagine. For me, it's like I don't know. I don't have words to comprehend that. This day and age, we are having a discussion on something like that. To impose it on a general society on that level will surely diminish a country's progress, right?
Yeah, Sanjay. But also remember that there are many cities in the world right now where people would throw rotten eggs at you if you were to say this to them at a public meeting or a conference or a cocktail party or whatever, right? I mean, try saying what you just said at a cocktail party in Paris or San Francisco or something like that, right? So there are many centers of cultural power where this is now accepted. See, it's transitioned so quickly. If you remember, Sanjay, 15 years ago, when Obama ran for president, Obama was not even in favor of gay marriage. he was in favor of what was called civil union for gays. And at that time, that was supposed to be a very liberal, progressive position, right? That was like, oh my God, wow, this is so progressive. Civil unions for gays. Now, fast forward 15 years, the debate has completely changed the other way, where even somebody with Obama's views will be considered a tyrant and a fascist and a
Oh no.
Nazi and all that if you look at the modern gender debate in many parts of the world. So, yeah,
Yes.
you shouldn't be surprised by this. You should perhaps be concerned, but not surprised.
Yeah. So definitely that is something that we should never establish in our country in terms as an ideology. It's okay. I mean, there can be certain biological differences. There can be certain people with difficulties coping up with the society, but that has to be handled separately as a separate case, because as far as the research has given, I have read this somewhere. Don't quote me on this, but less than, I mean, few, only a certain percentage, a very small percentage of the population are actually affected by this. But the media and all these talk about this stuff gets it bloated to a sense that almost half of the population is experiencing this stuff. So that's a disproportionate representation of the actual issue, which is might be the core root of the problem where Trump has decided to address. That might be a part of it. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, so, and that argument has always been there, right? That even if you look at Western media portrayal and all that, that they make it look like the LGBT community is much bigger than it actually is. Where now every TV show has either a gay character or a trans character and stuff like that. So that debate has already been there. Look, the thing is, for me, I am, as far as all this stuff goes, quite. I mean, I don't really have a strong position on that in terms of the. I believe that as long as it's adults who make a decision. I mean, if a 45-year-old man wants to chop his whatever off and become a woman tomorrow,
You
I
can
don't
say
really
penis,
have
that's
a
fine.
problem with it.
You can say
Yeah, okay,
penis, that's
fine,
fine.
right? Exactly. Okay, good, good, good. So like, if you want to chop
Yeah,
your
that's
dick
up to
off,
them. That's totally
yeah,
fine. All
yeah,
right. So
absolutely.
yeah, you gulp it down the children's throat. That's not allowed. That's a
Yeah,
different story.
and then where you now have government American taxpayer money being used for gender affirming therapists. So where if a child goes through this, the government now, the state provides a therapist to now assure you. So it's called gender assurance therapy. So if you come to me and say you're a woman, I would be like, yes, Sanjay, you're a woman. Yes, look at how feminine you are. Embrace your feminine energy and all that. And the American taxpayer pays me.
Sorry, what?
So basically, that the American taxpayer also has to pay for a lot of this stuff now in terms of gender affirming therapy and all that. All I
Okay.
can say
Yeah.
is, so
Yeah.
when we're a big global podcast someday and somebody takes out this clip to
Yes, we
cancel
are done
us,
for.
yeah, all I can say. So the views
No, we are
basically
not done for.
expressed here.
Actually, we are not done for because actually it's the other way around. Not so. I mean, all those people who has that kind of a view might attack us, but then it will also propel us to attract many more thousands of percentage. I mean, the vast majority of the population in favor of us. That's what happened to all these comedians that they try to cancel.
Yeah, yeah, good, good. So if that happens, good. But let's not forget that the comedians had to put up with a lot of shit as well, right?
Yeah,
Until things actually turned out well. So I was
yeah.
just going to
That's
say, look,
because they were working for organizations that were forced to enforce these laws. So
yeah,
we
yeah.
are.
I mean, I'm not taking any risks to whoever's trying to cancel us. Just remember that these were Sanjay's opinions and not mine. Right? I
Yeah, of
am.
course.
I mean, I'm very, very pro 900 genders and 1,200 sexual orientations and all that. I'm totally on board with that.
Okay, whatever makes you happy, man, and whatever makes all these other genders happy also. So
Yeah.
let's just say that. Okay, let's go into the next step. Establishes Department of Government Efficiency. Okay, this is a good one. This is where
Yes.
Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy comes in.
Yeah.
So this is
And this
pretty
is a
much similar to what we are doing right now in Sri Lanka, right?
Yeah, similar to what we are trying to do as well, where the whole focus is on right sizing and the whole focus is on making sure that we can cut down on waste. So in Sri Lanka, not just in Sri Lanka and the United States, in every country around the world, there's a great deal of administrative waste where you have lots of departments and bureaus and offices and all that, which are not that necessary. And the whole point of this is to go through those one by one and to streamline the administrative service in order to make sure that it's not a bloated government that's in place. It's a proper, streamlined, efficient, effective government bureaucracy that's at play.
Okay, so this all these they say they have about 400 plus government departments. We have state-owned enterprises here. Does America have SOEs?
So they do have state-owned enterprises, yes. So they do have state-owned enterprises. It'll usually be a partnership of some kind, right? But typically, it's not going to be on the same level as what we would see in other countries, because America in general is a far more entrepreneurial country than I would say any other country in the world. So they do have that, but not to the extent that you would find here as a percentage.
So why okay, both Vivek and Musk is the richest man in the world. Vivek is also a billionaire. So why would Trump select these two guys to head the efficiency department?
Well, so number one, he feels that it's a good message to his vote bank. I think he felt at that time, at least, this is before the controversy over immigration visas and all that. At that time, Trump felt that these two would be accepted by his support base and that these guys would be able to
And they
do
have.
something. Sorry?
And they have accepted.
Yeah, they have accepted, but that they would be able to do something once they were given this responsibility. So it's only now that we will see whether they can actually see through or not. And Trump also wants, typically, he wants business minded people on his team. His team picks have almost always been very business minded people. So, in that sense, both of them tick the box as well.
Would you like to have Vivek as a candidate for the next election? Maybe the one after.
I
Would you like to
really
see? I
don't.
mean, we don't have the voting powers over there, but would you like to see?
So I wouldn't really like to see an establishment candidate of any kind. I would
What do
like
you
to
mean
see an
establishment
outside,
candidate? I don't get that.
like somebody who has the firm backing of a party. Like I would support, I would want an outsider to come in the way that Trump came in, where you're not a Washington person, you're not somebody who's been a part of this system.
Vivek-
So he's been
So
in.
Vivek is a person like that.
Yeah, he's been in politics for a long time. He's been involved in politics for a long period of time. So I would want it to be somebody whom the establishment is not comfortable with, the way that the establishment was not comfortable with Trump, which is why many fundamental changes even happened in the American system.
But a lot of people said that whoever comes to the president seat, you cannot change anything that much. Everything is run by a deep state. The American presidency is just a show, like just a front-facing thing. So you are now saying something different, that Trump could have. I mean, he was able to change in his past tenure as well as this one. He's going to change something for real. So there's a discrepancy there. So would you
See,
think that
but no, but
it can be done?
Trump,
It can be done.
yeah, Trump already changed stuff in his first term, where he was the first U.S. president who did not engage in a large-scale invasion of another country in God knows how many presidents. So Trump has already made, like he did make a lot of changes. So once again, we need to see, it can't be a question of can you entirely eliminate the deep state or you do nothing. It can't be that kind of dichotomy, right? It is true that regardless of which politician comes to power, there will always be a certain bureaucracy that holds on to power, right? It's true. But that doesn't mean that every president has to be a complete zero who does not manage to make even a small dent into the system. So for example, all of these executive orders, you can make an argument that these are all dents on what would be called the deep state.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, and coming back to Musk, so a lot of people have, I wouldn't say a lot, some, let's say some people have mustered a quite, uh, let's, it can't be hatred, you can't call it hatred, an animosity towards Musk. Maybe, why do you think is that they think, I mean, I have seen some crazy parallels that Trump is considered, if Trump is Gota, then Musk is Dilit for some reason. That's a crazy comparison. But not, given the achievements of Musk, why some people think that he's so ineligible to support this Trump's presidency?
See, number one, any young billionaire involved so directly in politics will have haters. Number one, right? Number two, anybody who has the unconventional views that he has will have haters, right? Number three, the guy says a lot of dumb shit. So yes, it is true that there are a lot of people who simply hate him for who he is, and because he's rich and he's very vocal with his views and all that. But the guy also says a lot of idiotic stuff. Unfortunately, I mean, I myself have written, a month ago, I remember sending you an article that I wrote where he made some really dumb comments about how modern day fighter jets are no longer of use and stuff like that. See, the problem with many of these
That's the
billionaires,
one we should discuss. Yes, definitely. Yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
the problem with many of these billionaires is that once they become billionaires, they think they become experts on everything. So if you look at this could be Bill Gates and the hate that Bill Gates has and a lot of the dumb shit that he says, or whether this is Elon Musk now, right? The problem is many of these guys, once they get money, they want to now make proclamations on everything, and that ends up exposing them. And Elon Musk, once again, look, he's a really bright guy and he's an unconventional thinker and all that. But would I actually call him an objective analyst whom whose analytical skills I would place on a high level? No. He's a maverick visionary, and that's a good thing. There's a place for that. And well done to him for having made all his wealth and for having been involved in a lot of revolutionary stuff. I mean, in terms of space, for instance, right? The fact that to rescue astronauts in space and all that, the US government itself needs to ask him for help, that's a huge achievement. And nobody can really take stuff like that
and
away
and
from him.
and and catching a 23-story building out of thin air and stabilizing on two metal hands.
Yeah, right. I mean,
Yeah.
the physics of that itself is mind-boggling. So, and this is despite all the opposition that he had in terms of building himself up to this level. But at the same time, I can also see the other side where he says a lot of things which irritate the people who know what they are talking about. He has the typical billionaire scholar syndrome where everybody now wants to be Tony Stark or Bruce Wayne, this kind of the real sort of a heroic swashbuckling
Narcissistic.
maverick. Exactly. Right. So he has a lot of those tendencies, unfortunately, as
But
well.
we all
So
love Tony Stark, right? So he even though he's become a narcissist, maybe it's because a movie character and not real. Is that why we love him?
I mean, yeah, I mean, let's face it, Tony Stark in the real world would kind of be 10 times worse than Elon Musk, right?
It's a
So
good
if
one.
we were to actually have him there, so yeah,
We love him because we get to see his softer side and the personal life and his sacrifices and all that. That is
yeah,
highlighted
and
on the movie.
he's witty, he's intelligent, he's likable,
Cracks jokes.
cracks jokes, exactly.
So maybe does the same, but we don't get to see it. So
No,
maybe
but
kind of.
see, but Elon Musk is not that. Uh, he's he's a good conversationalist, at least from the interviews that I've seen and all that. It's not that he's bad at conversation,
Mhm.
but he's not particularly witty, if you've noticed. He has a lot of unconventional views and all that, but he's not a particularly quick-witted or funny guy.
He thinks a lot, no, when speaking.
Yeah, yeah.
Sometimes in some
But
interviews.
that's quite normal. He's not an impulsive speaker the way that, let's say,
So
somebody
what
like
he
a Trump.
says, he really says them. That's the danger, right? So
Yeah, that's
sometimes
the
they say
danger.
stupid shit,
Yeah, exactly.
and
Based
he
on
really believes
half-baked
them.
knowledge.
Yes.
There's a saying that the really ignorant ones are not the dangerous ones. It's the ones who know half but think they know the entire picture. Those are the dangerous ones. And Musk, like Bill Gates, is unfortunately one of those types.
Okay. So let's move on from that. We have next the foreign policy prioritize. Yeah. So this one is important for us. This is geopolitics. How
Mhm.
does this affect Sri Lanka? Let's come down to the big question.
Yeah, yeah. What was that again? Can you read it out again?
Yeah, this one prioritize US interest in all foreign policy decisions.
Okay, perfect. So this is the basic crux of Trump's foreign policy from day one. This is not just something for this particular regime. This has been Trump's philosophy, which is that the United States has compromised on the interests of the American people in order to be a global policeman, right? Now, just a small bit of history as we remember, in 2016, whom did Trump have to first defeat? It was not Obama, it was not Hillary Clinton, it was not Bernie Sanders, it was the Bush family. Jeb Bush at that time was the front runner to get the nomination from the Republican Party. Trump came out of nowhere. People were like, what the hell's wrong with this guy? He's crazy. And
Yes.
Trump went on a rampage saying, your family destroyed this country. Your family took this country towards all kinds of wars and all that. And you guys are the prime reasons why we are in such a sorry state today. And this is during Republican debates, right? Until then,
I
no
remember.
Republican could actually question the Iraq war and the Afghanistan war and all that, because that's what the Democrats were saying, that these were illegal wars. So the Republicans had to defend it. So Trump came in, he smashed that. He turned the Republican vote bank into the anti-war vote bank, and the Democrats, the pro-white, is crazy, right? Crazy dynamic shifts in US policy. So that executive order basically says, in everything from now onwards, American interests will take primacy, not our role as a global policeman. The world can take care of itself. Our job is to take care of ourselves. I wish somebody would pass an executive order like that here.
Okay, explain.
As we discussed many times, we don't have a list of foreign policy objectives. It just changes from party to party. I wish somebody could just pass an executive order saying, these are Sri Lankan interests.
So you
And
wouldn't say that if Trump loses, Trump is anyway cannot compete again. So when the Republican Party loses next time, the Democrats come in and they can change this. No, it's not
yeah,
a
so they,
written in stone.
yeah, it's not written in stone, but at least the government can function based on objectives that have been listed down, right? So there will still be some level of continuity. So for example, if you look at foreign policy under the Trump regime, most of the things were carried on by the Biden regime. It's not like the Biden regime reversed every single bit of Trump's foreign policy. Right. So, I mean, even the withdrawal from Afghanistan was basically a transition from the Trump to the Biden regime. The worsening of relations with China was a transition from the Trump regime to the Biden regime. So, there will be some, of course, I agree that a new party can come and reverse everything, but it would at least be a committed foreign policy that a regime has pursued certain objectives for, and the next regime that comes in place can select a few of those things which it can take forward, and a few things that it has to reverse. But right now, we don't even have those few things that can be taken forward because there is no doctrine, there is no continuity.
Okay, so prioritizes US interest in all foreign policy decisions. We've discussed that.
Yep.
And this one, so this one is, yeah, I was going to say, since this, but as common sense dictates, if US is not going to get involved in any more new wars and not going to police themselves, where you get involved in other countries' policies, the countries' foreign
Yeah.
policies.
Yeah, and Trump is the first Republican to actually come to power on that promise, because the Republican Party typically have been a pro-war party over the last 75 years or so. Trump has been able to change not only the traditional Republican vote bank, but also get in a lot of new voters. So many of Trump's voters don't belong to the traditional Republican vote bank at all. They were independents or moderates who then came in because finally you had somebody here preaching this.
So next one is pretty straightforward. Strengthen vetting process to prevent foreign terrorists and threats from entering the US. Hard to believe that they didn't have such measures before. Is it, or is just
See, they
elaborating?
all, yeah, yeah, they have lots of vetting procedures and they have lots of screening tests and all that, right? But Trump's major issue is that they've not done a good job screening these people, and that the system needs to be a lot more focused and a lot sharper, and that you cannot use human rights as an excuse to cut down on the surveillance and the screening of potential terrorists. That's
So that
basically it.
means more surveillance, more government intervention into your privacy.
Possibly, yes. But once again, if you're going to crack down on the drug cartels, and if you're going to crack down on general security-based measures, you have to be ready to implement more surveillance. These days, security is impossible without surveillance.
So the privacy will be challenged.
Anytime the security of your country is strengthened, your privacy will be weakened.
Okay, just one side question there. So, in the digital initiatives of the Sri Lankan government that they are planning to implement, there is one particular criteria where they are collecting identification data and authentication data of the populace, where you can have a password, fingerprint, and they're gonna store iris information, retinal scans in the database, as and also maybe face recognition as well. So there is a concern that if we, for example, like if we store retinal scanning information on a secure government database, there's a chance that that could go into the wrong hands, could leak. So I'm just trying to get your opinion on that. Anyway, we have to have ways of authenticating and tracking people uh, for the administrative purposes, but will that be violated, and could this become a more of a privacy issue rather than an administrative benefit?
So anything like this can become a privacy issue, but the problem is this is the future. You can't really stop it. Many people had the same concern when passports came out for the first time, and people were like, wow, I mean, if my great grandfather and your great grandfather had heard that every single person on the planet needed a passport in order to even leave their country, they would have been shocked. And this is not 500 years ago, this is just our great grandfathers, right? So the if you live in a country where you have an NIC system, where every citizen is supposed to have an identity card, then all of your details and all that is in some database somewhere anyway. So these things, there will always be privacy concerns, but at the same time, you can't stop this. This is the future. Once we, as societies globally, we move towards documentation, and we decided that administration has to be based on documentation. Once we embarked on that journey a long, long time ago, there's no way to actually reverse it.
So you would argue that there are more benefits to that than cons.
I would argue that whether there are benefits or not is irrelevant. It's going to happen. Whether it benefits us, if it rains tomorrow or not, is irrelevant. It's going to rain tomorrow. So in that sense, I think there are pros and cons. There's, in some cases, it's a good thing. Digitization and centralization of information is a very good thing. And in some cases, obviously, there are privacy concerns as well. It's like having CCTV cameras all over a particular place. Some see that as a huge violation of their privacy, where the minute you step out of your house until the minute you're back inside your house, the government can see where you go to work, where your kids go to school, where your spouse goes to work, where you guys go as a family. The government basically has all of that information. And some people will consider that a violation of their privacy. Some people will say, hey, this is a good thing. I don't have to worry about getting mugged on the road. I don't have to worry about getting robbed in the streets because Big Brother will be watching everything. So there'll always be pros and cons, but my major takeaway from this is that you can't stem the tide. This journey began a long, long time ago, and it cannot be reversed. This documentation journey.
Anyway, we have given our behavior patterns, our likes and dislikes, where have we been or not, our friends, what have we discussed with them. Everything is on social media. So if they want to profile us, it's not even Sri Lankan government. It's somebody. It's something else, something outside Sri Lanka, and it's not even a government. It's a private company sometimes. So they already have our information. Even the face identification is with them. So
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
it's fruitless to argue on along those lines, because it's already out there. It's just that we are getting some services from the government using those information. So that's where I am at.
Yeah,
Okay, so let's today we'll discuss the first 13, and maybe we could have another session to go through the next 13.
yeah.
Strength. So let's go to the next one. Strength the vetting. Okay, this discussed. Encourages the development of Alaska's resources. Okay, so this one is quite interesting. So they are going
Yes.
back to developing oil and gas, where they might have to relieve themselves from certain international treaties. So he has already said that he's going to exit from the Paris Accords.
No, no,
Uh,
not said. If you go to page 2, it's already there
it's
as the
this already there.
26th or 25th order. So that's already been passed and that's
Okay,
done as
yeah,
well.
it's
Yeah.
done. So what do you think? What are the repercussions?
Yeah. So basically, this is because
And why?
Alaska,
And why? And why?
right, because Alaska is home to a huge energy resource pool, as you know, particularly for LNG. So Trump is very, very pro LNG, liquefied, natural
Natural
gas,
gas. Yeah.
right? So
So the
now
Russians
this is,
didn't know when they sold it to Americans.
hey, the Russians this entire time thought they had Europe by the balls because they were the ones producing energy to Western Europe. But now, the minute the Ukraine war started, the Russians thought that the Europeans were going to bow down because of a lack of energy. And for the first winter, yes, Europe had a very bad winter. But America, my God, the shale revolution in 2008 finally came to, full potential. And today, American LNG companies have almost replaced Russian energy companies entirely in their supply of energy to Europe,
Do they have
right?
pipelines or ships?
Through ships. So today, the United States just 20 years ago was a country that was invading other countries to secure its oil interests. And today, the United States is a net exporter of oil. So the geopolitical energy equation has completely changed. So Trump is very, very pro LNG. In fact, Trump is pressuring the Europeans to buy more LNG from the United States. And even in this Alaska thing, what he's basically saying is that previous governments placed a lot of unfair regulations on Alaska for their environmental concerns and all that, right? Because of fracking and all of that, trying to diversify into alternate cleaner energy forms and stuff like that. So there were many laws in place which restricted Alaska's ability to produce traditional energy. Whereas now this executive order basically cuts down on all those regulations. And the point is to help Alaska ramp up oil production, particularly to help with LNG. If I'm not mistaken, the executive order specifically mentions liquefied natural gas as one of the main focuses of this development boom.
So having a net export of oil or oil reserves in for US right now, is that the reason why they don't need to engage in any more oil wars or any more wars
Yes.
outside US anyway?
No, so that's the reason why oil no longer needs to be one of the pivotal issues over which direct military action is needed. See, the thing is, even before this, the vast majority of US intervention in the Middle East was not for their own oil consumption, it was to protect their client states. Countries like Saudi Arabia, Israel, blah, blah, blah. The United States has a lot of important client states in the Middle East. So it was to protect their interests predominantly that the Americans were involved there. However, the oil politics and oil companies certainly had a role to play there as well. But you're absolutely right. The fundamental reason the United States no longer needs to be as directly involved is because of the shale revolution, which now gives the United States far more oil than it needs.
What's
To
what's
the point where
what's shale revolution?
the shale revolution was something that came about in 2008, where they found a new way to extract oil
Ah,
by doing a special kind of drilling and all that. So if you Google shale revolution, you will see what it is. And it's very, very controversial because it requires breaking down the rock and stuff like that. So people were like, it's not environmentally friendly, blah, blah, blah. And people were like, we need to stop fracking. I'm sure you've heard the term
yeah, yeah.
fracking,
I have.
right? So this will now free up Alaska to do all the fracking that it wants.
It's because of fracking. The shale revolution is a period in early 2000s where the United States became the world's leading producer of oil and gas. This was due to a technology innovation named fracking, which allowed the US to extract oil and gas from shale rock
Yeah,
formations.
yeah, from the rocks. Yeah.
Quite interesting. Can't we do the
Yes,
same?
and this has changed the global equation.
Wow. I didn't know that. I mean, I knew about fracking, but I didn't know the geopolitical effect on that. Wow.
Yeah. So this is the great thing about geopolitics and international relations, right? The more you learn, the more you kind of keep realizing that everything is interconnected in some way or the other.
Yeah, the moment the dots starting to connect, and you see
Yeah.
the reasons behind it, not just some lame excuse of corporate greed or anything else. There's something much deeper,
Yeah.
and much more intelligently involved than that.
Yeah.
Okay, let's look at the last four. It strengthens immigration enforcement. That is about the border wall,
Yeah,
majorly,
the
I
border
guess.
wall. I think there are two executive orders on walls. This is in terms of the screening and the fencing and things like that. And if I'm not mistaken, there's a separate one specifically focusing on walls.
But just to come back on the wall, so initially
Yeah.
in the initial Trump presidency, he was talking about a concrete wall that is about 12 to 20 feet high, and but the actual wall is not like that. No, it you can see through the wall using slats, but you
Yeah.
cannot climb it.
So
So
in some areas it's a wall, in some areas it's like a fence. So it's not one standardized
how do
unit.
you monitor such a big wall, such a big border? Are
So
there drones
drones,
technology?
manual surveillance. So I mean, and once again, this is why walls, even though it was laughed at the beginning, it's actually quite effective at repelling certain kinds of illegal transfers. Of course, the types of organized, planned transfers with resources like what the drug cartels and the trafficking networks and all that use, they might find ways to bypass it. But there are certain types of illegal immigrants whom you can't stop with basic walls as well.
In the inauguration speech, he told the audience about the mishandling of crisis, new, uh, especially the Los Angeles fires, and he mentioned one other natural disaster occurring from the tornadoes recently. What about what's the mishandlement? I mean, we see America as the most technology advanced nation on earth, but you cannot simple manage a simple I mean, I wouldn't call it simple, but they cannot manage a basic natural disaster. Is it something to do with some sort of mismanagement, or just the scale of these natural disasters are too extreme, even for the most technologically advanced country on earth cannot handle it, cannot face it?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's mostly the second, the scale of it. But at
Mhm.
the same time, I'm sure there's always mismanagement. You can go into almost any government in human history's handling of a natural disaster or an unforeseen crisis, and you will be able to come up with a negative review if you want to, right? So California has almost become the poster child that the Elon Musks and the Donald Trumps of the world use to show how bad this whole liberal, left
Mhm.
leaning, woke establishment is. That these guys are just useless cultural communists who can't get anything done, and that all their planning is useless. And if you keep voting them into power, then you will burn as well. So it's kind of, I mean, look, California has a lot of homeless people, has a lot of wealth inequality. California has a lot of people fleeing California to move into Texas and Florida and things like that, right? So there are lots and lots of deep, deep issues in California, but I am not too sure if the wildfires themselves can be blamed purely on incompetence rather than a huge disaster. I mean, of course, maybe someday we'll go into this. I need to check up on some of those details. So I heard that it's these huge eucalyptus trees that were purchased 100 years ago or 115 years ago or something that are the reasons for
Mhm.
these constant wildfires, because those things after 100 years or something, they mature and they leak out that eucalyptus oil, and in hot climates they
Ah,
catch fire or something like that. So I think there are
we
certain
have
man-made.
eucalyptus here also
Yeah, but I think it needs. I think there's a
on
certain
hilltops.
weather. I think there's a certain weather in which it's so. For example, eucalyptus. I know in Noor area here, we are in the hills. We have eucalyptus. Even in India and Pakistan, Nepal, in all these South Asian countries, we do see eucalyptus in hilly areas, which typically tend to be quite cool.
Hmm. But the
So I don't
eucalyptus
know. I
was
have to
brought
check
here.
up.
No, it's not the natural for flora and fauna found in Sri Lanka.
Eucalyptus.
Yeah, it was planted here. No,
Perhaps I'm not too sure. I mean, because
I
it's a
think so.
huge commodity in terms of the oil and all that. So yeah, yeah, I'm not too sure whether they are colonial sort of crops or whether they are indigenous crops. So, but anyway, but my point is that it could be a natural disaster, it could be man-made, or it could be a mix of the two. But Trump has to make it look like a case of mismanagement.
Okay, so this one is interesting. So they are going to pause U.S. foreign aid for 90 days to review and ensure alignment with U.S. interests. So since we are working with China for some of the projects, will that affect our aid receiving capacity from the U.S.?
No, no, no. I don't think merely trading with China is going to bring anything down on anybody, because
U.S. trades with
China's
China the
biggest
most.
trading partner, yeah, is the United States. So it's going to be in areas where they feel that their interest is directly being compromised by some country or the other. See, the thing is, no country will actually say, do not trade with China, do not trade with the United States, do not trade with India. Trade itself is not the problem, it's the strategic aspects linked with trade that becomes the problem.
Mhm.
So the Trump regime will only act against parties that they feel are directly confronting or contradicting American interests, rather than simply having a good relationship with China or whatever.
So why? Okay. So next one. Why did he have to declare a power energy emergency? He called it energy emergency. Is
Yeah,
it
yeah. He calls
what's going on?
so, and if you look at the language of that
Hmm.
executive order, he mentions many, many different things. For example, he says, our foreign dependence on energy has become weaponized. As in, what he's basically saying in that is the enemies of the United States are weaponizing American dependence on foreign energy. Right? It must be
Example?
somewhere there on the third or fourth paragraph or something like
Yeah,
that.
you
If you
have read
search,
this?
yeah. I've read some of the. As in, I just gave the 26 orders a cursory read, so I just have a few basic memories of reading it. So I remember
Domestic,
him
they
using.
have targeted our domestic energy infrastructure, weaponized our reliance on foreign energy.
That's what I mean. Weaponized our reliance on foreign energy. That's what I meant. So he's basically saying.
How did they weaponize?
So what he's
If
saying.
US is the most has the oil excess oil reserves.
Yeah, excess oil reserves, but at the same time, there's also the US is also importing oil. See, it's not this perfect system where everything that's being taken in one part of the country is neatly distributed to other parts. The United States is both exporting and importing oil, which is why it's a net exporter. As in, if you add up the exports and the imports, the exports are now higher, but that doesn't mean that they don't import anymore. So Trump wants to cut down that importing process entirely, and he wants to use all the available resources towards ramping up energy, particularly LNG production. And the only way to
And they
do
have
this,
an
and by,
unreliable grid.
yeah, I mean, see, even they call their own grids
Unreliable.
unreliable. Yeah, but
So
but the
we are
point
good in
is,
that sense.
yeah, he needs to declare it as an emergency in order for it to be taken seriously and in order for the work to get done quickly.
Does the word emergency means anything in the US Constitution or US law
So
making?
typically, once again, when you draft these things and all that, the language is very important. So when it comes up, let's say it's challenged in the Supreme Court someday, or let's say it comes in front of a congressional hearing someday, or even in terms of the daily public discourse, the term emergency prioritizes it. And you can make certain energy provisions as well if it's an officially recognized emergency.
What I love about the American system is, though, I mean, there are pros and cons, but the president can come to office on the next day. He can do certain or enforce certain laws and new directives to the entire country with a single sign.
Yeah.
We had that conversation in our presidential elections held recently, where Andhra said that within one signature I will change certain things, but obviously it will be within one signature, but there has to be some background work to be done. That's why it's taking time as far as I'm concerned. But in their case, they can just come in, draft it beforehand, obviously, and they just come in and sign them all and take it them to action. So that system is made in that way to honor and execute this.
Yeah, but we've also got to remember that Trump is the first person to use it in such a proactive way. Even though this system existed, presidents are typically not that keen on doing something. I mean, signing 26 executive orders in one day, I'm not too sure
Because you don't
if
need
the system.
congressional approval. Here, it is not the case. Maybe
Yeah,
there are a lot of
exactly.
checks.
Right. And presidents are reluctant to be very gung ho and be very,
Practice power.
yeah, to
Practice
practice,
power.
because it sends a message that you don't care about the checks and balances. See, Trump, by signing 26 executive orders on day one, the message, more than the message of all of these orders, the ultimate message is that he does not believe in the checks and balances system. He feels that the checks and balances system are harmful for American interests because they prevent crucial decisions from being taken.
Are you a cricket fan?
Yeah, to a certain extent.
Okay. You know mancading?
Yeah.
So mancading is considered frowned upon, but it's legal. So it's there to use it. So likewise, it's there, so he's using it.
Yeah, man, I did that in a school match once, and it turned into a big brawl. But anyway, never mind. Yeah, but you're absolutely right, right? Something that is accepted but frowned upon, as in something that is legally permitted but ethically frowned upon.
Okay, last one, restores the death penalty for severe crimes. having preacher of human rights, it's quite ironic that the Americans went in this direction compared to what they are preaching the rest of the world, but maybe not this regime, but the previous regimes. What do you think of this?
Yeah, and typically the death penalty in the United States has always been a big part of the southern states and the conversation and all that. So the United States cracks down on human rights in terms of democratic institutions and systems. But the United States as a country has never forced another country to ban the death penalty, because many US states like Texas, for example, still follow the death penalty.
It's not federal.
Yeah, it's basically a federal. No, there are some states which have the death penalty and some states which don't. I mean,
Okay,
somebody
then
can
why does
correct
he
me
need
if
to
I'm wrong.
restore then?
I think there was like an unofficial moratorium. Can you click on that if you don't mind?
Okay, they have two types of prison system, no, state prison and federal prison. I think
Yeah,
this is
there's
for
federal prison for the big ones. Yeah. So basically, I remember this. They see, look at that second thing. At every turn, they seek to thwart the execution of lawfully imposed capital sentences and choose to impose their personal beliefs. As in, even when the guy has been given the death sentence, they do not actually implement the death sentence, and the guy just lives out his time. So what they are basically saying is that we need to go back to correctly interpreting the law, which is that when a death penalty is given, we follow that
uh,
sentence.
so if the law says that for this particular crime you must impose the death penalty,
Yeah,
and
and
up to now it wasn't carried out, but now it will be enforced and carried out.
yeah, and more importantly, it's to spread the message, to create the perception that the Democrats are full of these pedophiles and child molesters. And that if you look at that, you will see, and on December 23, 2024, President Biden commuted the sentences of 37 of the 40 most vile
Hmm.
and sadistic rapists, child molesters, blah, blah, blah. So there's a political messaging in there as well, that because this whole issue of our pedophiles secretly running the government, all this Epstein stuff, that's a big part of the public consciousness, and Trump knows that. So this is a
Is
way
there a
to
truth to it? Some truth to it?
see. I think there must be some level of truth to it, right? I mean, throughout history, this kind of stuff has been practiced by the rich, whether it was emperors owning child slaves for sexual pleasure, or even all the human trafficking that we see today. Considering what we see, maybe it's, I mean, obviously it's not like everybody in power is a pedophile, and every billionaire wakes up saying, oh my god, let me molest some children today. Obviously
Of
it's not
course.
that.
Yeah.
But at the same time,
There
when you
are.
have a certain vice, it's like gambling or drugs or whatever. When the rich want it, the rich are going to get it in some way, and there will be people willing to do that for a price.
It's a different kind of mentality.
Yeah.
Okay, just the final points. So I observed the Trump speech when he delivered it, and I observed the two special, interesting two characters beside him that didn't clap. You remember those two?
Was it Biden and Kamala
Yes,
Harris who were
Biden,
there?
Kamala. Yes.
Yeah,
So
I mean, but
everybody else was clapping. They clapped for one thing. Do you remember what that was?
no, when he was saying that, I remember when he took his oath and all that, everybody,
Yeah,
because
everybody
they're
clapped. Yeah,
forced to have
that's
to smile and
customary.
clap.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, yeah.
customary.
No, what was the other thing that they
The
clapped
other
for?
thing, the other thing they only clapped was for that. He said that some hostages were
Yeah, yeah,
released
the
and
hostages. Yeah, there was a big ovation from
mm,
the this one as he was saying that. Yeah, you're right. I
that's the
remember.
only thing they clapped for. All the other things they didn't clap. But it's interesting, right? You have to hear your opponent's his speech, and you can't say anything against it now because it's its inauguration, and there's no debate can be done about it. You are the lost party, so you have to
Yeah.
respect the mandate of the people. That's so quite interesting.
Yeah, see, but at the same time, let's face it, these people are all friends. These people are all on first name basis with each other. These people have all known each other for decades, right? So there's that element as well, that to them this is a game where people win and lose. It's those of us at the bottom who often see a bifurcation of sorts. But let's face it, all of these people know each other. Fundamentally, all these people are the same people. I know I said Trump is different in terms of the policies that he's preaching and all that. See, but once again, see, the thing is, if I say, hey, George Bush and Bill Clinton are essentially the same person, what I mean is there are lots of similarities in their policies and all that, right? You can always say, oh, but Clinton's name starts with a C and Bush's name starts with a B. So are they not different people? But my point was that essentially, for many, many metrics, this is the same class of people. So they will all smile and clap anyway. So did you see the way that Obama and Trump were kind of giggling together and all that? Yeah, that's basically politics, man. Come on. How many times have we seen it in Sri Lanka? Huh?
Yes.
How many times have we
All these
seen?
weddings, tea parties.
Yeah, all the back then the SLPers and the UNPers, and then the SLPP and the SJB and all that. I mean, these people are all friends. It's us who get the short end of the stick.
With that point, let's wrap up for today. I think 1.5 hours we have spoken and covered a lot of ground, but still there are 13 more executive orders to go. So let's talk about them next week with more updates, because we might hear some new things happening in US, as well as how it relates to geopolitics. So until next time, Nilan, I'll let you go and we'll see you soon. Take care.
Until next time, thank you.